Hi everyone, this is Claudia Castro, otherwise known as Claudia Nicole, with 26 Days Book. That's what I got up there. But I'm also with the Sonoma Wine Nest, which is why you are watching my video and reading my blogs. But I wanted to share with you an interview with Shelly Rafanelli with a Rafanelli Winery, and I'm telling you, she was so gracious. For my first interview, you guys, it was really amazing. We talked about women and wine and Merlot and topography, microclimate, the Dry Creek, and her amazing rich family history. Wow. So hopefully you guys will get a lot out of this interview because when we went up there just a couple months ago, it was really spectacular. It was breathtaking. And I just wanted to write about it. I wanted to tell you guys about it, but I just knew that I just could not do it as much justice as if I were to just call her, get her on Zoom and talk to her. And just after talking with her, I said, wow, I really got to share this with you guys. So Merlot is not the type of wine maybe you think it is. The Dry Creek Valley is unique in many, many different ways. Her family history is really, wow, incredible. So sit back, just grab a glass of wine, maybe some appetizers, and hopefully you guys will enjoy the show. And hopefully there will be much more interviews after this. Shelly, thank you so much for just really spending the time with my people, my guests, and everybody who listens and watches what I send out. And just always know, you guys, you have a home to come to in Sonoma County. Thanks so much. Dry Creek, or what do you think the Dry Creek should be known for?
Um, a lot of things, and that's, I think, part of the charm and a lot of the draw to it. So being born and raised in Dry Creek, I'm fourth generation winemaker. So of course, like you said, we have this long family history, and we're deeply rooted in the Dry Creek Valley. But what some of the things that set it apart, I mean, I'm like trying to figure out how can I rate them, one being the best to number 10. It's really the topography and the microclimate that I think really sets it apart. And because of the soils, the topography, and that microclimate, that's why grapes grow so well here. So I really have to say, like your husband said, the ambiance of it, the setting of it, the location and the weather, which is conducive to growing premium grapes, and also makes it a very nice place to live. It's situated, it's a very small valley. So if you've been here, it's only a couple miles wide and, not very long in length. And it's split by the Dry Creek, which comes from Lake Sonoma and empties into the Russian River. And because of that, we have this really great little valley with fertile soils split by the creek. But then on the east side, you've got the benchlands, which are mostly planted to premium grapes. And then on the west side, you've got the mountains. And just over the mountain, as a crow flies, you're going to reach the Pacific Ocean. So the ocean is right there. And so you have like this small little valley, and you have yet a very diverse topography within it, and also a great diversity of soils, which makes it great for growing not just one variety of grape. You can grow so many things here, and so many different varieties. And then I'd also have to say, going back to the weather, what makes it so nice is that, typically, I don't know, we see more extremes, and climate change is, here, and so everything's always changing. But typically we have this rainy season, our summers are dry, our average, summertime temperatures are usually around 85 degrees. But what makes it even better is we get this great fog that rolls into this little valley in the summer during the early mornings or late evenings. It cools off the temperatures down into the 50s, which the grapes love. That helps to keep the acids up in the grapes. And it also just kind of refreshes and hydrates everything. And then in the early morning hours, usually by 7, 8 a.m., that fog pulls back out to the bay. and to the tributaries which it came from. So then again, we're left with bright sunny days. And then, you know, our winters, I mean, we are in California, our winters are never that bad. We don't have snow and ice storms, and we just have typically a good rainy season. And still those temperatures during the winter, I mean, they're usually in the 50 when you have those storms coming in. Yeah, we'll drop into the 30s here and there, but that never lasts throughout the day. The days always kind of warm back up. So even if you have really cold nights, you're still going to be able to go out and do stuff during the day. So as I always tell people, I mean, yes, you live in California, but when you live out here in Dry Creek, you can be outside, you know, all the time throughout the whole year doing stuff. So yeah, I love this valley. I mean, it's beautiful. Every time I think I told you this before, every time I leave, go on a trip, and there's plenty of beautiful places to see outside of California and other places in California, but there's something to be said when you drive back into this valley. It's like, wow, it's not that bad to live here.
I agree.
Yeah.
Part of a article that I was like, I want to get Shelly's take on this. So the article says, Rafanelli, which I believe is your father, and I quote here, Rafanelli has even broken down and allowed Rochelle to make 500 cases of Merlot, a variety he's not overly fond of. His feelings are mixed, but Rafanelli figures that in this case, it's only fair to indulge his daughter. My father didn't want me to start with the Cabernet either. So one is, okay, I heard you introduced Merlot to Rafanelli, but two, did your dad really have a hard time giving you that rein on making Merlot?
He did. So we had Merlot vineyards. We've always blended a small amount of Merlot into our Cabernet program. So, you know, we had it. But when I first came back from college, we had just harvested a brand new planted Merlot vineyard just south of the winery. And the fruit was spectacular. And my husband was like, you should make this on its own and see what you can do with it. So I approached my dad, and all I was asking was for 1 barrel. And I love Bordeaux, so I wanted to treat it more in a Bordeaux style. I wanted to beef it up. I wanted to make a big bodied Merlot. And so I did my 1 barrel, and he didn't really say much. He just was like, why? But again, every generation that they want to leave their stamp. They want to bring something to the business. And, you know, my dad started the Cabernet program. My grandpa didn't want it, like you said. I was like, well, I'm going to start the Merlot program because we have this fruit. These grapes are mostly sold to other wineries, but let me take a small amount and play with it. And then all of a sudden 1 barrel grew to 3 barrels, then it grew to 10, and now it's up to 22 barrels. And I want to keep it a small production. I want to see it as a winery only wine. So it's really only for direct sales, and our A-list customers get first dibs on it. But it does speak to the fact that Dry Creek can grow great Merlot. It's all about management and how you grow it from day one to its first production. And therefore, I bring it into the winery. I treat it like a Cabernet, actually. It's in French oak. It gets extended time on the skins. And then the key factor too is I blend a good percentage of Cabernet. So blending that Cabernet Sauvignon into the Merlot kind of gives it a little bit more structure, a little bit more backbone and ageability. So it's not your typical California Merlot. And my biggest challenge was when I started making the Merlot program, though the movie Sideways had been released, and there was a huge glut of Merlot on the market. And whenever you have a glut, that means there's a lot of bad stuff out there, right? Yes. And so it turns the consumer off, and they're like, oh, they put their hand up to Merlot, and then Hollywood glorified that even more. And it was so difficult because when I started selling it, this was happening. Wow. And I had so many people coming into the winery asking, why did you make a Merlot? Or they would just say, oh, I don't drink Merlot.
Right.
Do you have any Pinot Noir? And I was like,
Right.
no, we're in Dry Creek. It's not Pinot country. And you would have to convince. But part of the challenge and part of the reward was convincing people to try the Merlot. And it was like, oh, wow, this is not your typical Merlot. And now it has its own little fan base and it sells out every year. It's always on a bottle limit. And it's nice because I can cherry pick. I've got six different blocks to choose from, and I cherry pick every year for my own production. And so now my dad's like, do you want to make some more?
You're right. I love that. I love that.
He's always saying, well, why should we sell this fruit if we can make it and make a premium wine and sell it to our customers? So, but I've really refrained from, our biggest thing here at the winery is we made the decision a number of years ago. It's quality, not quantity. And that's where we want to stay focused. It's a family owned and operated winery. And we really want to keep it to a certain level of production where we can manage the quality every year and we can make those decisions ourselves. And so I really just decided, nope, the small production, let's keep it limited, and it makes it more special too for the consumer.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's the beauty of visiting boutique wines, who really understand, and not just understand, but they're actually taking advantage, like yourself, of that climate, of that soil, of, what will produce the best wine for that particular area and which fruits. And I think you really complemented that really nicely. So I have taken advantage. So I have a favorite winemaker in Healdsburg who also happens to be a woman. Okay. She makes wines in a unique way that seems to address women. Like, she's got the fruit, the flowery, the chocolatey, the herbaceous. I mean, and she's just really, really good. What typical styles of making wine that you can say, you know what, maybe it stems from being a woman. I mean, I don't know. I feel like sometimes women winemakers can have a certain style that can differentiate themselves from the men.
Sure. I think, as from my personal experience, making wine, I'm making a wine that I really enjoy to drink. So I'm trying to make this wine that's accessible, approachable now. So I'm kind of going for, I want to finesse the tannins. I want to accentuate the fruit without taking away the ageability, because for, multiple generations, we've been known for full-bodied reds that continue to evolve in the cellar. So by coming in, I've just tried to finesse the fruit in the vineyards a little bit more, and then finesse it by using newer equipment that I got when I first came back on board. And then, of course, I feel like as a woman winemaker, I pay attention to every little detail, which drives everyone nuts. But I think all those attention to details, whether it's out in the vineyard or in the cellar, really do attribute to that style and kind of encompassing what I want to showcase from my wines. And I feel like women do a really good job of multitasking and paying attention to detail. Of course, I've heard, and we also are supposed to have better palates. I don't want to say we do, but
I've never heard that, but okay.
Yeah. I've heard it many times that, women are a little bit more instinctively better with their palates, but I can't say whether that's a for sure thing, because my husband has a great palate and he can pick up things sometimes that I can't. So, right. But I do think as women, we do put a spin on our wines possibly that aren't more about bigger is better and massive and burly, and maybe we put a finishing touch, a softer touch on those wines. And I think if you look at a lot of things, the majority of in the household, I think the majority of the wine buyers are the women.
Oh,
I've read studies with that.
yes.
So being said, who's purchasing a lot of the wines, whether they're everyday wines or cellar wines, I'm not sure, but you know, obviously women are going to be maybe a little bit more focused on a certain style of drinking in their wines.
And you know what? That's a really good point too, because I do find a lot of women, come to think of it, who they don't care if they're going to say, you know, I drink a Pinot or I drink a Merlot or I just drink white wine. I drink a Chardonnay. And I'm like, what? We are not like, I think in general, and I'm just saying in general, I'm not saying all the women, of course, but if we like something, that's what we're going to say we like, regardless of what anybody says. You know, I could like Boone's Farm or I could like Cold Duck wine, but that's what I like, you know, I mean, and we're not, you know, we're not afraid to share that. So I believe, yeah.
I think intimidation, you don't see people being so intimidated by wine, especially women anymore. Like you said, yeah, they're like, no, wine is for everyone. And I've always told people, it's like, it doesn't matter, you know, because people will get intimidated by all the adjectives and the wine terms that they're not familiar with, or, you know, seem a little over their head. And I'm like, it doesn't matter. Just drink what you like. If you like it, drink it. You know, that's all that matters. And you don't have to have a lengthy description of why you like it. It doesn't matter. That's just all filler, you know. I mean, when I have to do tasting notes, I'm like, oh, I try not to be generic, but there's only so much you can say when you're describing wines, where if you just don't get so far out there, a lot of people are going, what is that term? And is that really a real word in the dictionary? And what is that spice? I mean, you know, who has access to that spice? So I always tell people it's great when people can keep it in simple terms. And again, if you like it, drink it. No one should judge you on that.
And you know what I hear when you say that is our grandmothers, our mothers, our aunts.
Yeah.
That's what it reminds me of. You know, one of my aunts saying, who cares? Who cares? Just drink it. Or my sister, and it's like, you know what? I'm just going to drink this wine, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, that's how we are. And you know, we like to watch these videos where they're smelling these wines and they're like, I can taste, you know, going back to your great grandparents, Alberto and Letizia. A stands for Alberto, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. They both immigrated from Italy, but they met here in the States, right? They didn't meet in Italy. Do you know where in Italy they were from, or why they decided to come to the US?
Yep. So a little background on the story. My great grandmother, her family made wine, grew grapes in Italy. Yeah. They were from Orentano, which is a small town outside of Lucca.
Oh.
And true to the Italian culture back then, her brothers were going to get everything. And she decided to make her way to the US. She just wanted to leave. And I think there might be a little bit more behind that, but we just will never know, because no one had an answer of why. When she came over to the US, she took a train out to the West Coast and ended up in San Francisco. And according to my great aunt, she never wanted to go back to see her family ever. So there's that little like why. Yeah. But again, I don't think anyone's going to ever know why.
We all have that.
Yes. And it's a mystery. You got to have a little mystery.
Right.
My great grandfather came from the island of Elba, and his family still resides there. He made his way to Norfolk, Virginia, decided that the East Coast the winters were way too cold. And he made his way out to the West Coast, and they met in San Francisco. But he was a carpenter by trade, and she came from a farming background. Yeah. And when they got married, she just decided, you know, the city isn't a place where I want to raise my family. And like so many Italian immigrants, had discovered northern Sonoma County and the town of Hillsburg and started sourcing grapes. And the next thing you know, they bought property, and here we are still today.
Yes. And I think legend has it that she was noticing these grapes that were coming into the city, and she's like, where are these grapes coming from? You know, I mean, I want to know where they're coming from. And that's kind of like what led her up, not to Napa, not to Sonoma, the town, but to Healdsburg.
Yes, yes.
And where they started the winery is now where the high school is, Healdsburg High School. But it was your father that actually took you guys out to the Dry Creek area.
Actually, my grandfather.
Your grandfather.
Yeah.
Okay.
My great grandparents had also owned property here in Dry Creek Valley at the same time that they were still on their home ranch in the town of Healdsburg. And then my grandfather, Americo, was the one who kind of discovered Dry Creek as, you know, a great place to be growing grapes and purchased some property. And he was the one who purchased a property where we're still located today.
Which is interesting because he's the one who came in, noticed the property, and kind of, you know, laid the foundation, so to speak. And then your father came in with education. He went and studied it, and through that process commercialized it, and just kind of gave it a good setting point to where you're coming in, and you are now kind of with your great grandmother's wit, maybe, and fortitude. You're actually now leading the winery into really purifying the grapes that are on your your vineyard, which is absolutely amazing. How do you think the curiosity of what your great grandmother had to actually find the grapes where they're coming from, moving into the Healdsburg area, because I'm sure she had a lot to do with the influence of her and your grandfather going out there, right?
Yes.
How do you think that kind of relates to maybe a curiosity that you have that obviously you're sharing about with the Merlot?
Yes. Yeah, she was like 5 foot, and this little Italian woman that just showed so much perseverance and dedication. And she was the one who planted the vines and the orchards. Wow. She worked those while my grandfather was still building houses. So, you know, they could still make a living for the family. And she's the one who taught him how to grow grapes and make wine. So, and the great thing about it too, is my great aunt told us when Prohibition came into play, she insisted on still planting more vineyards because, in her words, it was a stupid law that would never last. And that gave them a step up when it did get repealed. They still had all their vineyards in production. And of course, it was tough times, but they persevered. And if it wasn't for her moving forward, because we've seen some tough times, you know, we've seen a recession ourselves. We've seen wildfires. Now we've seen COVID, a pandemic. Yeah. And, you know, like she did, she had to see Prohibition, World War, the Depression. They had to go through it all. So I look at that and I'm like, you know, I shouldn't really complain. I'm very, very lucky to have the opportunity that I have. And of course, my dad elevated the business. It's a huge responsibility for me to keep it elevated and keep moving it forward. Wow. In a direction that, like we always talk about, hopefully that it'll be in good shape for the 5th generation if they're interested in taking it on.
That's amazing. That really truly comes full circle. But I think it's beautiful how you can, you know, hold on to your heritage and kind of lean on your great grandmother's, you know, ambition and her strength.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Amazing. Your wines have won many accolades for your Zins, mm-hmm. right? Which is your favorite overall wine and why?
Oh gosh, that's a tough one. Everyone always asks that.
Okay. Is it maybe a
babies.
Merlot that you're proud of, or like?
Well, they're all my babies, and I can remember each and every one of them because you live and breathe harvest, and that's a tough one. We are a Zin house. I have to say, being a Zin house, Zinfandel it's a love-hate relationship. It's such a temperamental grape to grow, And it's a very challenging wine to work with in the cellar, especially at harvest time.
Yeah.
So, you know, when it's done and you're happy with it, it's the biggest reward. But I do have to say, one of my favorites was probably going to be my 2007 Merlot. It got high scores, and it was like that first breakthrough moment of like, okay, I've made it. I've been acknowledged, and yes, I can do this with a high level of standards and expectations, and make it. And I think that's one of those that I go back to and say, okay, that was proof that, okay, I'm doing it and I'm doing it good enough.
That's amazing. And 2007 was a great year. I think 7 and 12.
12. Yep. But I have to say, sorry, I almost like my 13s better than my 12s.
I've heard that too. I've heard that too. I've heard from winemakers that go, no, the 13. I'm like, really? I'm like, because we have some 12s, but they're like, but we always hear the 13 was just as good. Your winery, right, has known not to be frilly, right? But in my opinion, it's one of the most beautiful for its natural beauty, which is kind of resemblance to the wines. When I went there, the last video I did, I was like, oh my gosh, you guys, you got to come out here. It's breathtaking.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have the opulence of a pretentious tasting room. It has a natural beauty to it that you can actually drink your amazing wines, your boutique quality driven wines at a fair price, right? Mm-hmm. This is Dry Creek. What do you have to say about that?
You know, I live here on the property. I have to say the number one thing that I hear when people first come to visit is, oh my God, this is so beautiful.
Yeah.
You're so lucky to live for that. You got to stop and smell the roses. Yeah. And I'm like, it's a constant reminder. Yes, it is a beautiful piece of property. It's a little slice of heaven. It's just that when you live here, you see all the work you're doing to maintain. But we're situated up off the valley floor just enough that it gives us a really pretty view of part of the valley. And then we're surrounded by our vineyards, and the backdrop is the mountains. And then we have a beautiful little pond. And again, you drive up and it almost looks reminiscent of Italy with the cypress trees and the hillside vineyards. And so, yes, and I have to attribute, my dad is a visionary and he can grow anything, and he's planted the majority of these vineyards and he's landscaped the majority of the property, and he's done an amazing job. And it's beautiful. And again, you walk into the winery, which is, it's a 100-year-old building. It was a workhorse barn, and it's old and rustic, but it does have a lot of character. And again, when you walk in, you feel like you're actually walking into a working winery. So unpretentious, but surrounded by beauty year round. Even though, in the wintertime, it's not as pretty as it is in the summer, it's still pretty.
It's still very pretty. And the fact that a lot of the planted vineyards are on hills is what I think your father says, is the secret sauce to making and producing great fruit, is to having that those grapes on the hillside where they can really get some direct sun and really be sheltered from a lot of that direct heat sometimes.
Yeah, so anytime you're planting on the hillsides, it's a steeper, rocky, shallow soil. And so it's well drained. So it's not, getting waterlogged. Production is going to be more limited. And then you hope that the concentration of flavors is going to be higher than if it's a vineyard planted on the valley floor in that heavy soil where the water content's much higher throughout the year. And again, it was all trial and error, because we did have vineyards such as Zinfandel and Cabernet planted on the valley floor here in Dry Creek, and the soil was too heavy and the quality wasn't there. So you had to learn. So you had to replant to something that was going to do better in that soil. and move up those varieties up on the hillsides where quality is much better. But a lot of trial and error. And this, you know, goes back to the 60s and 70s of, you know, all the replants and learning which varietals will work in which sites. And again, my dad, you know, he's got so much experience in managing and planting vineyards. And he's always told us, you only grow the variety that's going to do well at that site. You don't grow to the market. You don't plant to the market. You grow what's going to grow best there, because you don't want to have to replant. You don't want to have to pull it out and replant.
Right.
So yeah, so he's taught us a lot about growing vineyards and managing vineyards. And above all, he knows these soils like the back of his hand, and they do change drastically from the top of the hillside to the bottom of our hillside, to the valley floor, to the benchlands. It's amazing.
So I think what we are noticing a lot in Sonoma County are families like yours that are multi-generational, and that's where the expertise, the refinement from generations, you know, you're not going to find that from one winery that sells to another winery that sells. I mean, I'm in mergers and acquisitions, you know, and I'm learning all about that side of the business. But I think the beauty of, you know, the Europeans is because, you know, you find these vineyards that have been passed down for generations. I mean, sometimes for hundreds of years. And that's how you are able to really cultivate and refine your wines. And I think that's what's really amazing about your winery is that you're fourth generation. You know, you like I said, you had your great grandfather come in, lay the foundation, kind of set it up, then your father came in, and you know, so it's beautifully handed down in that amazing. The other thing, so your wines, I hear, can mainly be bought direct. I've come to learn more about the business of wine, like I was telling you about. Your winery does it not have distribution? Is it also direct? Like the only way you can buy it is if you either go to the tastings or you're on the list. You're on the A list, which I like. I like that. Got to be on the A list.
Yes, thank you. So we're known as an on-premise wine. So the majority of our production is sold directly to our A-list customers. And that was a list that started by signing a guest book in the late 80s when you came to our tasting room. Wow. And of course, that list is now grown, and now it's all computerized. But it's really, it is available to restaurants. So it is distributed. Most of it is in the Northern Bay Area. And then we have also actually got into the Southern California market a little bit more now. So we do have a broker that represents us into what I would call our target restaurants, because we don't do any marketing. And we love to be represented in those nice restaurants with great chefs and great menus and great wine lists. And that's a little bit of marketing for us. When a somm or a waitstaff actually recommends our Zin or our Cab to someone and they've never heard of us, the next thing you know, they might come for a visit or sign up for our A-list and start buying wine directly from us. So we are distributed, but really only to restaurants, no retail stores. And so as an individual, you would have to call us up to order and get the wine.
Which is really, really unique. I mean, so you can't buy it in a store, and it's being bought by, we learned how close the fires came up to your property during one of the fires. I don't know if it was the one in 17 or the one in the one in 20. Yeah. Was it the one in 2020? I think it was the one in 2020.
So we got really lucky. The 17, the 18, the 19 fires were not close to us per se. We didn't have any smoke damage. We didn't really feel the effects. Those fires were also much later in the season. So we had already harvested our fruit and it was already fermented and inside the cellar. However, 2020, it was the Walbridge fire that affected us. And a lot of people didn't know about the Walbridge fire because they had all the other fires on the in the Napa County going on at the same time. This was all part of the LNU complex, the lightning fires. The Walbridge was started by lightning and it burned for 2 or 3 days. There was no resources to get out there. And it ended up coming within a mile of the winery. We didn't lose any structures, no vineyards were burned, and we're very fortunate of that. However, we were basically on a mandatory evacuation, which we didn't evacuate. We stayed here. But we had so much smoke and ash for over 10 days. And the effects of the smoke really did prevent us from having a 2020 vintage. So that was the most difficult decision I've ever had to make as a winemaker, is to not pick the fruit and make any wine that year, and to see a whole vintage be lost. But that fire started August 18th, and none of the grapes were quite ready to be harvested. We do all red wines, and the effects of the smoke was just too much of a risk for us to attempt to make wines out of, not knowing enough about smoke taint and the ability just to mitigate it, but not eradicate it. So hopefully they'll find better ways. They're working really hard on doing that, but that has become a challenge for us as a winery, because when you're missing a vintage, it definitely throws your inventory off. And then the way you're going to sell is going to be a little bit different for the next couple of years. So we're working through that. It's navigating through those tough times and telling our customers, well, we don't have a new Zin this year, but this is what we can offer you instead. And hopefully they'll be back. We have a 2021 in the tanks and in the barrels now. So it's exciting to have wine back in the winery, and that'll be bottled and released next year.
That says a lot about the quality consciousness that you guys have as well, because I have literally gone to some great tasting rooms, some of my favorite, and they're like, try this, and then or they'll present it, with the smoky type of taint on it. And one lady, because we knew her, she goes, "Oh, Claudia, no, I'm not going to have you try this. I don't like it. It's full of smoke." And I'm like, "But you bottled it, like, I want to try it." She goes, "It's not good." Okay. So you're trying to learn a little bit more about that smokiness type. Is that what I'm hearing? That's amazing.
Well, the thing is I was novice, rookie when this all happened. I had never had to deal with smoke taint. And my biggest concern was I didn't even know if I could pick up smoke taint in the wines. And we were scrambling like crazy. I did a bunch of micro ferments, like a lot of other winemakers were doing in the valley. And we actually all got together and brought our samples in and sat down and tasted through. And it was great because I could pick up the characteristics of smoke taint, because it can show itself in different forms.
Right.
And so it was a real big learning experience, but it was also that confirmation of, there's no way that I could try to bottle this and filter it out as much as possible, but have the possibility of it coming back up in the wine once it was bottled and sold to my customers.
Right.
And that's a really scary thing. So I said, it's just not worth the risk. I couldn't recall this. And, we just don't know. I also don't fine or filter my wines. So if I filtered them to begin with, you'd be coming in and tasting it and going, this is not a Rafanelli wine. This is a totally different style. And so first and foremost, that wasn't even an option. So
yes,
it was one of the deciding factors. And I learned a lot, and I'm still reading up on it. And I know a lot of R&D is being, done, and hopefully they'll come up with some solutions, because you just don't know about the fires and the drought and the temperature and the extremes that we're having to deal with these days.
And I'm glad you make that point too on the filtering, because I find some wineries do filter their wines, and I've heard they filter them to make them very consistent, to be pleasing to their membership, right? Because we expect the members expect a certain quality of wine. But I like how your wines, they're not filtered. They're premium, pure terroir tasting wine.
They are. And that also contributes to our uniqueness. And so you as a customer or an A-list member, that's what you've come to expect, is that style of winemaking and that consistency of quality in our wines. So if you all of a sudden detour drastically one vintage, it'd be hard for me as a winemaker to stand behind that and
Yeah.
explain why. So we just decided to do pull library wines and offer library wines. And that's a great way, especially with Zinfandel, to show our customers how well Zinfandel can actually age and what it actually does in the cellar. Because so many people have this, preconceived notion of, got to drink Zin right away. And most people do drink their wines, in a very quick time, but it is fun to see how they age. And I really feel like that's a whole education of the palate right there.
Oh, sure. Yeah. We've had wine collectors collectors who have had like 10,000 bottles to their library, stay at our home.
Yeah.
And we're always picking their brain, like, where did you go? Which wines did you have? And I think one of the wine collectors did choose Rafanelli. Because of the quality and because they're the type that, like, a lot of wine collectors, they'll buy a case of different years so they can try them, or they'll buy a case of one wine in 1 year and then pull them just once a year, once every other couple of years, right? So yours would be a great example of how to do that. Well, I think what makes your story so unique, and I'm going to close out with this, is you have a great, and being that this is Women's History Month, I wanted to pick this topic, but being who we are, being multitasking, being, the human race of strength, a lot of times, it's interesting that your grandmother kind of introduced it, what I call a velvet liquid, and refining it to, that's a great story. I mean, I really, really find that a great story. I think you and I talked about that, how, if we women just continue on with persevering in what we like to do, is really important. So on that note, and talking about that, and talking about, I mean, obviously from our talk here, you have a passion, you have a drive, what would you want to leave people hearing this and knowing about you, to really know about you and about how you make your wines?
Gosh, I would love for people to be able, like you said, to see that it is a passion. And I've always said, it's not a job, it's a way of life that we have chosen, my husband and I, because he's a vineyard manager. So it makes it truly a family business. But to be able to see the passion that goes into it, and the fact that we, dedicate ourselves so much to it. And for me to be able to share that with my customers, and for them to be able to appreciate my wines, I mean, that's the biggest reward for me. So hearing how much they like the wines and they enjoy them and they share them with their friends and family, that just is so motivating to me. It keeps me going, okay, I can do this another vintage. I can do another harvest, no matter how tough it gets.
Right.
And if they can just see that dedication and that passion and really appreciate it, because I always tell people when they come to the winery, they get to see that end product, that nice glass of wine, and that's what they're getting to enjoy. But if they got a glimpse of what went to get to that glass, what went on throughout that whole year in the vineyards and in the cellars to get it to the bottle, then they can really, really appreciate what it takes to farm vineyards and to make wines. And then I think there's so much more to talk about with that glass of wine.
Well, and we're talking about not just the past year, but your history and generations of cultivating a landscape, literally, cultivation of generations.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So anyways, with that, I want to close out. I'm so excited to write about this, and that'd be great. I would love to someday I think my husband and I would like to just see what goes on in the harvesting.
Oh yeah.
The whole process of that. Our first walk in a cave,
well, I know a lot of wineries are always looking for extra hands at harvest. So if you guys ever wanted to actually get in on the action, you know, it's not hard to find that opportunity. And that is the actual making of wine. Is like so much of it happens at harvest, and it's exciting. It really is exciting. So
yes, and I'll send you some messages, because I'm sure there's probably a resource where people can go, because I know they do that in Europe. People volunteer to be a part of the harvest, and it's a whole ordeal, and we've seen that, and I think it's we should probably find out where we could go to learn all that.
Yeah, you could be an intern for a harvest, or
right.
Work for wine.
Right. We'll work for wine, exactly. Thank you so much, Shelly, for your
You're
time.
welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you,